Wherever you like.
Thank you. And you folks just sit right here. Congressman Veasey, thank you. Congressman Fleischmann from Tennessee, a Republican from Tennessee. Congressman Veasey, a Democrat from this region right here. Yep. And rather than me explaining it all, why don't I leave it to you two to tell the story of how you've done something that is just not politically allowed these days. I don't know if anyone informed you, but we're at odds with one another, and the red and the blue are not supposed to get along. What the heck is going on?
Well, welcome to Dallas.
Yes.
I love your city, Mark. We have shared the stage together before many times. We are neighbors in Washington, D.C., in the Rayburn office building. Our offices are right next door to each other, and we are friends. Let's address this very candidly. Since I've been in politics, the spectrum has gotten more polarized, it's gotten more divisive. That's the atmosphere. But Mark said something the other day, and I laud him for this, and I thank you for this. We were talking about, I'm here 8 years, I think he's been 8 terms, he's been here 7 or 8. He said at some point in time, you get past the politics and you're just going to say, look, I'm going to be candid and stay here and say what needs to be said to get things done. So before I yield to my distinguished friend and colleague from Texas, it's a privilege to work with him on the American Dominance in Energy Caucus. I chair 8 caucuses, 7 of which are largely related to new nuclear, clean energy. But the reality is the caucus format is a way that Republicans and Democrats can actually work together, whether it's on baseball, clean energy, or anything else, in a very bipartisan way, and that does actually work. So look for the caucuses when you look to the Hill for bipartisan cooperation. With that, I yield to my distinguished friend and host today.
Yeah, that's right. Chuck, great to be with you again, and welcome to town. I'm Marc Veasey. I represent the 33rd Congressional District. Boundaries very near where we are right now. I live in Fort Worth, but represent both the cities of Fort Worth and Dallas, Irving, Arlington, Grand Prairie. And happy to be with you today, and glad to be with my friend Chuck. And one of the reasons why I'm really happy to be with him, we are next door neighbors, as he said. And one of the great things about Congress is that businesses from your district will sometimes bring things by, and he has Altoids that are made in his district. And I drink a lot of coffee, and after bibbing a lot of coffee, I need some Altoids. And I can always go by Chuck's office and pick up a can of Altoids. And he's a really good guy. I just love just kind of talking with him. And people always ask us, do y'all even talk to each other? Because what you're presented on TV is not really what it's like. What's presented on TV is so you will watch TV. I hope that each and every one of you understand that. Everything that you see on X is so you will sit there and thumb up on X. That is not how we actually interact and talk with one another, but I hope that you are enjoying the jousting that we do with each other, and I hope that that's great. You're contributing to the economy by helping cable news people sell ads. But I wanted to do this with Chuck because I believe that the issue of energy is too important for it to be as divisive as it is. I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee, where we do all of these subjects around oil and gas, nuclear, renewable. And previous to me being on that committee, because it's very unusual that your freshman year you get on that committee. We have a couple of Republican freshmen actually, Craig Goldman, who's from Fort Worth like me, who replaced Kay Granger. Craig is actually on the committee, but it's very unusual that freshmen get on that committee. It's been decades since a Democrat has been a freshman on that committee, and it's rare that Republicans serve on there. So my first 3 terms in Congress, I was on the Armed Services Committee, and that is a very bipartisan committee. Usually when we passed out our large markup, which was the National Defense Authorization Act, it generally passed out 60 to zip, 60 to 5, like something like that. There was hardly anyone that ever dissented on it. Democrats and Republicans worked together. There were some things that we didn't agree on that ultimately made it into the bill, but whether it was a Democratic majority or Republican majority. We overwhelmingly voted on that because it was what was good for the common interests of the U.S. and our friends around the world. And I think that energy needs to be that way. I don't think that energy needs to be discussed the way that it is now. I don't think that we need to keep it in the ground, and I hear a lot of people on the far left say things like, keep it in the ground. That's just not realistic. We're not going to be 100% renewable anytime soon. I don't believe that there's anything as clean energy. I don't even like using that term. I think there's cleaner forms of energy. There's some forms of energy that burns cleaner than other forms of energy. But as each and every one of you know, for a lot of the rare earths that are needed in order to transform these new additions that we want to be able to put on the grid, there's a lot of politics behind those minerals, where they're going to come from, whether or not we're going to be able to have the mining capacity here in the U.S. to be able to do that. So there's no such thing as clean energy. There's cleaner energy, and that's the way that we need to be discussing these issues around energy. One of the things that my Republican colleagues on the committee say whenever we start talking about electric vehicles, and I don't drive an electric vehicle. I'm not a big, EV guy. One of the reasons why is because of my size. We make, the big SUVs here in Arlington, Texas, the Suburban, the Denali, the Tahoes and Escalades. And those types of cars for my size are much more comfortable for me. So that's what I like to drive. At the same time, sometimes some of my Republican colleagues on the committee will say, these cars are just sitting on the lot and no one wants them. And I don't think that's any incentive for us to pull back from that market. It scares me, and it should scare each and every one of you, that BYD, the Chinese company, says that they're going to have a car on the market soon that can charge in 5 minutes. And Detroit doesn't have an electric vehicle on the market that will charge in 5 minutes. That's what we should all be working towards. We should be making sure that Detroit is building that electric car that charges in 5 minutes, and not arguing over whether these cars are just sitting on the lots. If we argue about whether or not these cars are just sitting on the lots, all of us, whether we are red or blue or purple, each and every one of us are going to lose, and our kids and grandkids are going to lose. And so I want America to be on the forefront when it comes to technology and innovation in spaces like electric vehicles. And I also want America to be in charge of our own energy destination and goals. We have oil and gas here. We know how to produce it cleaner and more efficiently than anyone else in the world. And as more places around the globe, like the continent of Africa, begin to light up more and more, we want to be the people that are providing oil and gas. None of this is easy. The Germans found out the hard way that none of this is easy. They literally last year had to burn a record amount of coal because they decoupled too quickly from their nuclear platforms. So all of these things has to be done right, and they have to be done accordingly, and it can't be done like what you're seeing on cable news every night. It can't be done that way. Democrats and Republicans have to find a way to work together on all of these issues, whether it's renewable or whether it's oil and gas.
Pause and people are looking at me, I'm going to ask a question.
Yes. That's just interesting
So
for a
how do we
moderator to be
get this
sitting.
to
I've never
happen?
been on a panel where the moderator is back here.
That's right. Well,
Yeah.
the moderator is the moderator is going to step in whenever the moderator is called upon, or feels like it actually. So, but I feel like it because I hear what you're saying, and I fully agree, and yet we have a system here that doesn't cover the words that you just expressed.
Yeah.
There's no news media that will now pick that up and say, look what Congressman Veasey said. It actually makes a lot of sense. We better tell the American people that. You have one news media that is directed toward ventilating the worst things that the folks on one side say, and you have another media that is focused on hyperventilating about the worst things that the other side is saying, and that's what generates the eyeballs that they're looking for and sells the ads that they want to sell. that generates the sales for the products and services that we have. So we're caught in a system here. What can we do? And we know that you can't do it all. We can't depend on members of Congress to solve all of our problems. We can't depend on any one group. But here we have in the room, we have 10 different kinds of power represented in this room. What can we do together to solve this fundamental problem that we are not working together in the best interests of the country, the world, the environment?
Yeah. I'll take a shot at that and then yield to Marc. I come from a district rich in academia, the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, its system. That university works with a company called Battelle out of Ohio to run our national lab, ORNL. In my role as Energy and Water Chair of Appropriations, I fund all of our national labs. There's 17 of them. They're all wonderful, but we have the one in Oak Ridge that does everything a national lab will do. So we have academia, we have our national labs, we have industry, and the thing that really has inspired me recently, whether it's in fission or fusion or new nuclear, is the abundant capital being raised, private capital, to join us in public-private partnerships on these different endeavors. So I think when we engage more institutions, and I've alluded to some of them, the more people who come to the table and participate, I think will yield a much better outcome, because people will be engaged and more positive. People are not being left. When Marc and I came up with the American Dominance in Energy caucus, me as a center-right Republican and he as a Democrat, we opened it up to both sides. Republicans and Democrats are both joining that. So I think if you bring more people to the table, create a more fertile and furtive environment, you're going to get better results.
Yeah.
I'll yield.
Absolutely. No, I agree with Chuck. Bringing people to the table is key. And I think that for industry leaders in here, people that represent the various 10 sectors that were just mentioned by the moderator, one thing that I think could be really helpful is for you to continue to do outreach on both sides. So if you work in the renewable space, be sure that you're continuing to talk with Republicans. If you work in the oil and gas space or in the coal space, be sure that you're continually talking with Democrats about things that you're doing, people that you're employing in various districts and what have you, about some of the facts around this. Because I think that what ends up happening is that oftentimes you'll see groups and organizations in DC and they will just stop communicating with one side because they just don't agree with them. And so they just cut off all conversation, kind of like the way that we view news, right? Like if we hear something that we don't like, all of a sudden that television station is too liberal or too conservative, instead of actually being curious and wanting to know more about factual things that are happening around us. And we can't, and that's not good for politics, because the decisions that we make and the things that we vote on are very important for the U.S. economy and for the future of our country. And the more that you engage us, I do think that it's better. Criticize us equally and vocally. If you're from the oil and gas industry and you don't like what Democrats are doing, then let us know that. But just don't pick on us either, right? Like if I think all of us that live in Texas, for instance, know that in the Permian Basin, there's not a shortage of people that are undocumented that are working in the Permian Basin that produce the oil and gas that ultimately end up being things like gasoline that all of us put in our car every day. And anyone that's ever been down there knows that. So for the oil and gas industry, if Republicans are doing things that are on immigration forefront or on tariff forefront, that is bad for the industry, then criticize them the same way how you do us on EPA. And so that way, when you go into a Democrat's office, you have more credibility. And I'd say the same thing on the renewable energy piece with Democrats. the people in the renewable energy industry need to be having conversations about, things like Ambler Road. The Biden administration, killed that Ambler Road project, and a lot of people think that there's cobalt and zinc and copper that we need in that part of Alaska in order to really power our renewable energy sector in this country, and the road was killed. People in the renewable energy space, that needs to be a debate that they're having amongst Democrats about, hey, we actually need these minerals if we're going to produce this. We just can't think that we're going to get everything out of Africa or continue to get everything out of the Chinese. And so I think that for these industries, if you're having conversations like that, and it's not so much, and it's not, categorized and presented to members of Congress the way how we present cable news to the public, then I think that that there is an opportunity there. But it is going to take people being frank and just changing the paradigm and talking about these things and how we approach these things with Democrats and Republicans a lot differently than we do now. And that's going to take some courage, because people don't want to make their friends in DC mad. People have friends and people have alliances, and they don't want to shake those alliances. They want those alliances to remain firm. So there's a reluctance for people to do some of the things that I just suggested, because, hey, you may not want to make this Democrat mad because he's been such a good friend to the renewable energy industry, and you may not want to make this Republican mad by criticizing them on tariffs because they've been a really good friend to the oil and gas industry. And I'm telling you that if you do that, that's the sort of thing that makes it harder for us to be able to move this particular discussion into the space where a lot of our military discussions that we have are much more bipartisan.
We have to have honest conversations.
Yeah.
Be able to be self-critical and be uncertain about our
Absolutely.
uncertain so that we can explore these ideas. I want to invite folks to ask questions if there's any questions that you have. Yes.
So, as you both know, you're probably working on, I'm curious about, the federal government investment in renewable energy development was quite robust in the last administration and has been effectively frozen in this one. And I'm wondering, is that a discussion you have in your caucus in terms of, releasing some of these funds that were approved by Congress to help states work on these renewable energy projects like hydrogen and other things that I know Texas has quite a lot of them, and also a lot of Republican and a lot of Democrat states. So I'm just wondering what your discussions are.
Yeah. We haven't started talking about that yet, but that is a discussion that people are having on Capitol Hill. We haven't had that again in the caucus, but we've just this is a fairly new launching that we're doing. But people around Capitol Hill are having that. I mean, as you know, one of the things that has happened, for instance, in the automotive industry, is that a lot of cars. I mentioned Detroit earlier, but like now, a lot of cars aren't made. Especially a lot of these foreign car companies in places like Detroit now, they are made in places like Tennessee and Alabama and South Carolina. And some of those things that were passed in the Biden administration obviously were a huge boon to those states. And again, that money has been appropriated and it needs to be dispersed and sent out. And there are a lot of communities, a lot of jobs that are tied to those pieces of legislation that was passed, and I'm absolutely willing to work with Republicans to get that passed, and the same way that I was willing to cross over and vote with Republicans on things like Keystone Pipeline, because I thought that was the best thing for the country. And so absolutely, that was money that was appropriated and passed when President Biden was in office, and those communities deserve those monies and the benefits that go along with those monies, and ultimately those things that benefit the U.S.
One of those artificially partisan laws. We had the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was passed because it was led by a bipartisan group. But the Inflation Reduction Act, well, it was enabled by Joe Manchin.
Right.
But passed on a partisan vote, but only because it was part of the budget resolution process, which necessitated the partisanship. And a lot of Republicans support the IRA, don't they, Congressman? Is it
Well,
really a partisan bill?
In many ways it is. And let me just take a step back. And I hearken back to something that is very important to me, which is civil rights. I've just been working on a civil rights park in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and we got our governor to fund that for the Scarborough. Was the first desegregation in the South in the city of Oak Ridge. The issues like civil rights, Senator Baker used to, when he was living, tell me the story of how Lyndon Johnson would get his beagles and go down and see Everett Dirksen. And he'd say, I'm here, and he'd say, why are you here, Mr. President? He said, because I need bipartisan cooperation if we're going to make civil rights last and work. And I have found in my short tenure, whether it's tax policy, energy policy, if we get to a position where the Affordable Care Act was passed without any meaningful Republican input or support, whether you fall on one side or the other, our great endeavors, and I think energy is one of them, is going to need bipartisan buy-in and cooperation to make it stick. If we get these pieces of legislation that push people to their sides and stay that way, it's going to be a major impediment, because then it has that stigma attached to it in perpetuity. So, and that's why I'm glad to partner with Marc and other folks. Let me say this. I think it's critically important that we get these ideas out there. We are in very, very tight fiscal times. There's no question about that. We're going to see budgets. I will write the energy and water bill for the House. The Senate will have a version. The White House will participate. But in very tight budgets, it's really going to take cooperation, and it's going to be very difficult to get, because people will have a tendency to go to their corners. And that's where I think we just need to really work hard to make sure that we can craft the best bill. Many of my bills come out of committee with friends of mine who are Democrats, say, look, I like your bill, I can't vote for it, okay? And we understand that dynamic, and we're just as guilty of it when we're in the minority. So it's not them and not us. So hopefully we can get to a better place, but it's those big ideas. And I would just say this, we need energy, energy, and energy. The world's appetite for energy is voracious. We've got to have it in this country. I hear that from Democrats, I hear that from Republicans. So in that regard, we've got to try to get some common ground.
I saw some other questions here. Yes.
I have the privilege of working in plastic sustainability, which has a word that Republicans hate and a word that Democrats hate. And I think it really should be a bipartisan issue. We have a lot of work we're doing with DFB research labs. I was just actually in Oak Ridge a couple days ago. They do amazing work, and it's really important. A lot of that's paused right now, so a little bit of a follow it from before, but how do we make it so that it's not just government funded, that these research facilities are making sure they have the best research coming out that might be industry funded, might be private funded? How do we make sure this continues so that we are getting the information we need out of these labs?
If I may take a shot at that, I fund the national labs. They're all great. There's 17 of them. By the way, I'm an appropriator. Marc is very proud authorizer, Energy and Commerce. So not only is he a Democrat and I'm a Republican, he's an authorizer. I am an appropriator.
Right.
Very, very different distinction and different roles, very important roles. Some of my best friends, Gus Bilirakis is an authorizer, my roommate. But to answer your question, you look at each national lab. ORNL is run by the University of Tennessee, great academics, great nuclear program, but wherever it's got, they're strong. You've got Battelle, which runs about 9 of the 17 national labs. But look at Los Alamos. They're partnering with a great school. Texas A&M is in there from your great state. So industry will go in there and actually work. We have a partnership. This actually came out, President Obama went to Ernie Moniz. And Ernie Moniz came to me and said, let's get a national lab off of its parochial boundaries and into a city. And being from Chattanooga, I got scared. I said, uh-oh, it's going to go to that metropolis called Nashville. And I love Nashville. But we got it in Chattanooga, and we have now ORNL, a national lab, working with a public utility called EPB on tens of millions of dollars worth of things. So these collaborations, it's academia, industry, leverage the assets that we have, keeping the funding. It's funded under the Office of Science. And I realize we're going to be in tough times. I'm going to have to make some very difficult decisions as to where to put those key federal dollars. Do we take it from one program, which we may like, and put it in another? These are going to be difficult things. Here's the good news. It's going to require a deal between the House and the Senate. And the Senate will need 60 votes to get there. So by nature, it's going to require bipartisan consensus. I won't say cooperation, I'll say consensus. Mark, what do you think?
I really do hope that there's some light at the end of the tunnel, behind a lot of the funding issues that we're having with our universities right now. I think that, when we start talking about tax dollars that are being spent and how much money that we spend on these things, I think that the amount of money that we've invested in things like research and development and what we've gotten in return from great institutions in places like, Tennessee and Texas. I mean, the nuclear consortium that's happening right now between Abilene Christian, University and some of the other larger universities is going to be, great for cleaner energy resources for our country. I think that it's a very small price to pay when you look at the fact that America has been the ones that are leading. And when you start talking about the quality of college graduates that come out of our American university system and put that against the world, we produce probably 2/3 of the world's, top college graduates versus the rest of the entire world. And we want to make sure that we keep that going. And I think that the amount of money that we spend in research is small. I don't think that we should turn back the clock at all. And I think that our colleges and universities should continue to remain places where people can have a differing of opinions on these major issues. I think there's been way too much politicization that's happening, and I think that's being used as an excuse to make a lot of cuts to these universities, and I don't think it's good.
Other questions? I see Katie here. Katie, you want to do it? And then.
Hi, Katie Maynard. Thank you both for your amazing leadership on this. It's promising, I think, for a lot of people in the room. Where I'd like to go is jobs. So energy jobs, and I benefit from being, in an energy job in oil and gas and then, in the renewable space. We have thousands of Americans in DC, that are out of jobs. We've got folks across the country out of jobs, right? Energy jobs. These are good paying jobs. Is there a way to use something like jobs, nothing that anybody would complain about or see as a left or a right issue, to unite on? We have all this opportunity, with AI and the advent of all this new technology. What is your thought on how we could move people around something that nobody debates, right? Everyone needs a good paying job. I like to say we want to beat each other up. Let's beat, the countries that are, racing to get the innovation that we can develop here and leverage the talent we have here.
Yeah. I wish it were that easy for us to unite around the jobs. But even that has become, divisive to a certain point, I think. And I've had to, tell people, I had a union guy come to me once, like on Keystone Pipeline, for instance, when President Obama was president. And I remember him telling me, he said, when y'all, and he was the IBEW guy, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And he said, when y'all call those jobs temporary jobs, that really offends our membership. He said, I've been an electrician for 35 years. I've never missed a house payment. I've never missed a car payment. And I put my kids through college and managed to take my family on vacation once a year. And I've never clocked into a place. I've always had quote unquote temporary jobs. And so when y'all say that, it's not good. And it, unfortunately, for some people, I think that made a difference when I've told that story. But for some people, I think that, that it didn't make a difference. So I think that we actually do have a lot of work that we have to do on that front. I'm trying to explain to a lot of my, friends here that live in DFW that are Republicans, that, we're the third largest concentration of government federal jobs in the entire country. One of the great things that Mr. Rayburn did during his tenure here, and that continued long after he was alive, was we had a lot of federal facilities that have moved here. Earl Cabell in downtown Dallas, or the Patent Office, had the Department of Education, FAA Regional in Fort Worth, Bureau of Printing and Engraving, $100, $20 bills over in Fort Worth. We have thousands and thousands of people here, and I'll try to explain to people, that's these people shop at your donut shop and your dry cleaners, but some people have just gotten it so ingrained in their head that it's too big and that these people need to be laid off, and they don't realize that it's going to hurt them, and that these people are going to stop spending money in their neighborhoods, and it's going to have an impact on them, because it almost becomes like some sort of an unhealthy contest. How we rank people's jobs, and I think that if people get up and they go to work every morning and they work hard, that their job is just as good as the other person's job. It doesn't matter if it's in the oil and gas field or if it's working at the federal building in downtown Dallas.
Respecting people for who they are, what they do. I see we have a woman back here who has a question, and then I'll move to you.
Thank you guys so much for taking the time to have this conversation, right? I think it's just so important to start out the day, right? In terms of having this middle ground compromise conversation. So thank you, Bill, for bringing this together too. Yes, and honestly, I'd watch more TV if stuff like this was highlighted a bit. So maybe we should suggest that to the stations. Yeah. But one question I have for you guys, I'm thrilled to hear that there's a caucus that's working on something this important. How can industry engage better with that caucus would be my main question. I head up sustainable products and materials for Kimberly-Clark, and I'd love to know how we can work more with you guys to create some of those energy solutions.
Thank you so much. If I may, Marc and I cannot come up to a company or an industry and say, would you please sponsor one of our caucus events? That's an ethical violation, okay? So neither he nor I would do that. However, industry can, on their own volition, come to us, and I'll give you an example of my nuclear cleanup caucus, where we clean up legacy sites all over the United States. NEI, FCOG, and ITIBA. 3 industry groups come together. They will sponsor the event. They will populate the event. So whatever the caucuses that we have, and I'm sure at some point in time when we do our American Dominance in Energy caucus, as we go through and do those, sponsors will come in and basically put up the event and then populate the room. When I started the Nuclear Cleanup Caucus, we had 11 people in the room. The last one we had 200 people going out the door. So it was industry, it was Republicans, it was Democrats, it was academia, it was contractors who actually work to clean up legacy sites. And you can take that and move it from caucus to caucus, advanced nuclear caucus, spent nuclear fuel caucus, these are some of those. But this caucus that we have has that unique opportunity to basically bring everybody in the room. And so that's my hope. So if you have a desire to do that, go through proper channels and do it. But I can't make that ask, and neither can Marc, many times when I've really wanted to do that. What do you think, sir?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We definitely want to make sure that we follow the ethical rules. And I think just like I've heard, Chuck today talk about how proud he is of some of the things in his backyard there in Tennessee, some of the things that have really made America an amazing country. I try to be very local myself. And so just an example to your question is, for years I was on the direct selling caucus. I was co-chair, I'm in the caucus, but for years I co-chaired it. One of our venerable companies here in Dallas is Mary Kay Cosmetics. And that was why I co-chaired that caucus. And met tons of people from the direct selling industry, from Amway and other different companies, and they would oftentimes have direct selling caucus events that they would sponsor. You want to make sure that you follow the proper channels, but I think that it would be great that if industries like yours would organize events around our caucus and come and educate members that are in the caucus on how they can be helpful. 100%. I think that would be an amazing thing to do, and I think that it would help bridge that divide that has always been my goal since I got to Congress. And I said that when I first got here, I said I want oil and gas to be discussed the same way that we discussed military. I said that in 2013 when I got elected, and will continue to say that because I think it's that important. So please, absolutely, we want to hear from you.
I want to make a quick statement, or just a reminder for folks. Tomorrow afternoon, we have an event called the Leadership Circle, where we are going to be taking the ideas that are expressed here and at our energy and our circularity conferences and elsewhere, and putting together a set of action steps to take together collaboratively. So think about what the members of Congress here have said they need in terms of your support, and what you need in terms of their support, so that we can come forward with something that follows this conference. And this is not just talk, it's also action. Yes?
Hi, happy Earth Day to begin. Beyond bipartisan and nonpartisan work, I'd like to know what your congressional opinions are on what is the biggest hindrance to this American clean energy abundance. I'd just like to know what you guys think the biggest hindrance that professionals in Congress are facing, besides not collaborating and talking with one another.
And go a little bit further in your question, just so I want to make sure that I understand you correctly.
Of course. So we've talked a lot about how working together, reaching across the aisle, finding other working professionals, creating channels to discuss with our representatives, and I think those are all great initiatives. But what do you think is the single biggest hindrance or barrier to stopping us from hitting that abundant amount of American dominant energy, besides just the bipartisan divides, or the partisan divides?
I would say that, unfortunately, and I'll be 100% blunt and politically incorrect with you, it's become a part of the cultural war in many aspects, and that's what and I hate that that's happened in energy. But this is the same deal with the electric cars. I noticed that there were some people that were Democrats that were sort of wearing them as sort of a badge of honor. And then there were Republicans that were on the Energy and Commerce Committee that were, all bashing them as a badge of honor, and so they became, and always, and because I love sports, I probably use way too many sports analogies, but always I think about it almost like the Cowboys and the Eagles. As a lifelong Dallas Cowboys fan, despite Jerry Jones, I still love watching the Dallas Cowboys every Sunday, and I will tell you that if you needed for me to, if I had to root for the Eagles, I just wouldn't do it. Like it doesn't matter like what you told me about the Cowboys. Like you tell me all sorts of bad things about them, and you could try to convince me, Mark, you should just this one Sunday you should put all your money on the Eagles, and I just wouldn't do it, right? And I think that that's kind of what's happened in this energy space. And it's the same thing that's happened in gun safety, in the gun safety space. It's the same thing that's happened in many areas in politics, and we have to figure out how to unravel it. I really hope that this caucus that that Chuck and I are starting will sort of help be the road and build that bridge, because we need to untangle that.
With dollars in Congress as well, that people understand that if they want to keep a voting bloc together, they want to fan the flames of that cultural animosity.
Absolutely.
So if you want a group of Republicans or a group of Democrats to vote a certain way or to support your members a certain way, you can fan that flame, so that nobody will support the Eagles, in that community. And
right.
That's a dangerous combination: culture war plus dollars.
If I can maybe step back, she says we're about on time, but step back and try to answer that in a non-political way as well. I occupy, if not dominate, the new nuclear space with clean energy. And the thing that I've experienced over the past, well, I was elected in 2011, so 15 years or so, is the fact that everybody in there, this is a non-political thing, has the best reactor, has the best design, has the best technology. And we as members of Congress, whether we're Republican or Democratic, have to look at that and say, okay, explain to us why. So we have to bring industry in. So sometimes it's the sheer cost. I love new nuclear, but the cost of new nuclear is expensive on the front end. So to get that first of a kind built, we have a federal tangent of that actually supports that. We've had private industry dollars. We've had companies come up, but some of these designs make it, some of these don't. And when they don't, our foreign adversaries many times are state-run, state-controlled, and they're ahead of us in many of these areas. And they're ahead of us in selling it to other countries and the like. Even our allies, the French and the South Koreans, have gotten into this space and have done it well. So sometimes the sheer inability to get it right and put the dollars in the right spot, we'll look back and we'll say, gee whiz, we invested in this technology or in this particular design and it didn't get there. So technology, we're going to need American industry and academia to get it together and get it right so that we pick the right design so that we can win.
Can I say this really quickly? There's an interesting piece, and I'm, in order to sort of keep my brain fresh and make sure that I'm really being curious about things, I always try to read things from a different perspective for me also. And so I was reading an opinion piece that I didn't agree with this morning in the Wall Street Journal, and it wasn't in the editorial, it wasn't the ed board that wrote it, it was a contributor that wrote this opinion piece. And they talked about the 2021 storm that literally almost brought Texas to its knees because our grid was like a minute and 30 seconds away from crashing. And I was reading the article this morning, it made me start thinking about some of the arguments that we were having here in Texas about why the grid almost failed. So, two of the reasons why the grid almost failed is that, some of the renewable components, were not winterized properly. A lot of our platforms, when it comes to, our natural gas platforms and what have you, some of those are they're outdoors. In the Northeast, a lot of those facilities are enclosed. So if there's ever a really bad storm, they'll keep working, but ours are not. Ours are on the outside. And so there were areas where both renewables and both hydrocarbons could make improvements just in case we had another winter storm like that. But that's not the conversation that we were having. And it was crazy for me to open up this and read this piece in the Wall Street Journal today. And the woman that wrote it basically, saying it was 100% renewables' fault about what happened in Texas back in 2021, instead of us talking about how we can make improvements to both, renewable and hydrocarbon platforms when it comes to making sure that they're properly winterized. And that's a perfect example. But everybody took the bait and we turned it into the Eagles versus the Cowboys. What's better, renewable or oil and gas?
Ask all the questions, if we may, one after another, and then we'll give them a couple minutes to answer those, and then we'll move on to the next exciting challenge. So, Allie, and then you, and anyone else, quickly.
Thank you both. Representatives Veasey and Fleischmann, you both are energy experts serving on energy committees in Congress. And Representative Veasey, you just touched on the grid, but we spend a lot of time talking about generation types. We spend a lot of time talking about load growth. I would love to hear your thoughts on the connective tissue between the generation and the load, which is the grid. And we know that the grid is under energized for the data center growth that we're experiencing. And that is in the context of the onshoring that was catalyzed by the previous administration and that is prioritized by the current administration. So we have big infrastructure needs in terms of that connective tissue, building more transmission and modernizing the transmission that we have. how can we meet that moment with investment? How can we meet that moment with facilitation, whether that's siting or permitting in order to move faster? And how can that be a job creation and an innovation catalyst for this country?
Yeah.
Next question right here. And ask them fairly efficiently so we can get as many out as possible. Thanks.
I'll be fast. So I am a public high school teacher. My husband is a member of the IBEW and is a journeyman lineman.
I love
So I'm really familiar with that. Energy is at the heart of what I think kids should know about. I love the way that you present with each other, and having kids have good conversations around energy is important to me. So I'm familiar with the National Energy Education Development Program, which is NEED. And NEED is sponsored by a lot of really big industries, and they aim to create professional development for teachers and programming for K-12 students around all kinds of energy and the grid, the amount it costs us per kilowatt hour in each state, and the sources of energies that we use. And I'm just wondering how much you consider the K-12 space. Let's start them early in that conversation and discourse and getting them to know about energy, and if that's any part of what you discuss.
Great. And a question back here. So we've got the grid and we've got the K-12. Go ahead.
I'm a Texan who lives in Philadelphia. Think how conflicted I am. I want to tie in new nuclear university and renewable energy. So I'm going to call that a university, and I'm an alum there, so I have the right to do it. University of Pennsylvania. I was at a renewable energy meeting there with students about green hydrogen, and I asked a pink hydrogen question, that is using nuclear energy to generate hydrogen. Boy, the students were looking at their shoes. Later they came to me and told me that they were actively suppressed from even doing a paper exercise about nuclear hydrogen. There are embedded biases in these universities. We count on our universities for innovation, and I'd like to know how the caucus can use, frankly, the federal hammer to work this out of these universities. And what we've all learned in the last month is how much federal money all these universities get.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions before we close?
Yeah, I guess my question is, what are 2 or 3 topics you wish the caucus knew more about? And I'll tell you why. There are so many people in industry that'll say, well, everybody knows that. And that's why they don't come and tell you, you need to understand such and such better. So what are things that you wish you knew more about so that people in the industry say, oh, I can explain that to you, and then come and help you understand it?
All right, so we have a question about the grid, how we expand the grid for the modern day, how we use K-12 students and educate them, how we open up the universities and actually have open discussions, once again, and intellectual freedom there, and what additional topics you need to know about to do your jobs better.
Yeah, let me start on the grid one. Thank you for asking that question. The grid resiliency piece is hugely important, and it's something that obviously with Texas, us having ERCOT, independently of the other grids, that we're going to have to, really work on and spend money on to make sure that we're able to meet all this growth, particularly if we're going to continue to have the level of growth that, we've experienced. I mean, the last census data that I saw had Texas at probably picking up, 3 to 4 new congressional seats at the end of the decade. So that just tells you how fast we're growing. I am encouraged by some of the things that I'm starting to see on that front. I don't know if you saw the article a couple of months ago. I can't remember exactly which publication it was in, but it was about a new facility that is going to employ nuclear in order to try to meet some demand for all the data center growth that we're having. And so I think that for Texas in particular, because we have been the leader when it comes to producing hydrocarbons, we've been world leaders when it comes to producing renewable energy. And when it comes to making sure that we're addressing this topic of grid resiliency the correct way by bringing in some of these innovations like these smaller modular nuclear reactors and placing them in rural Texas to be able to help prepare for the growth of these data centers, I just think that we have a lot of opportunity here that we need to take advantage of and be serious about. It's going to cost some money, but I think that we can meet the challenge.
And Jeff?
Well, thank you. I'll take a shot at those questions. By the way, thank you for those very good questions. Data centers are going to need energy.
Yes.
The new nuclear designs, these small modular reactors that we are working on, and there are actually several designs out there, whether they're generation 3 that can use LEU, or generation 4, which might need HALEU. But until we get there, we're probably going to have to use natural gas. It's abundant, it's good, it's less expensive, and we are going to see a lot of need for energy there. So I think there'll be a transition. K through 12, thank you for being a teacher. I had 3 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, and 2 high schools in New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, and the like, and it was the teachers who helped me get through. So I thank you for doing that. The American Nuclear Society is just one group that actually has a K through 12 outreach. I believe NEI does as well. They can come out and talk about different forms of energy, particularly nuclear, but you just don't want one cell. I think you want to have a good conversation with the students. But that's so important. To answer the gentleman's question about what we could do more, I'm a political scientist, historian, LAS person, now author, lawyer, and the like. Because of my wonderful district, I am immersed in some of the best chemists, theoretical chemists, physicists in the world, some of the best minds, literally. I'm scientifically deficient in my educational background. So what we need credible experts to come to the table. We had a conversation this morning with people who were talking about different nuclear designs, and I was talking with actually a lawyer who was well versed in this. I was peppering him with the designs. What do you think about this, and what do you think about that? My chief of staff and I were there going and actually like, wow, that's an interesting perspective. We need more expertise. I need more expertise. My dear friend from Illinois, Bill Foster, is on the other side of the aisle, is a nuclear physicist. He worked at Argonne and Fermi, I believe. I tease him, I tell him he gets his science right and his politics wrong. We're very good friends. He'll come to the Republican Club and actually have dinner with us, which is great. And especially since I've never been to the Democratic Club. So
and it's actually a much nicer club. Their club is much
our food is better.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
It actually looks like a country club.
Yeah.
Ours looks like Bennigan's. Their club is very nice. Yes.
Thank you. And I'm glad you go there. And the food's very good. But we do need that expertise. So we need help. And that's why I think, again, these caucuses, we bring in people who spend their lives actually learning a discipline, and they can impart that to us. But that's kind of where we are. But we've got to get it right.
Can I say this real quick? Because I know there were other questions. I'll answer the one about the grid. You asked about education. And absolutely, we should be working with our young people at a young age to get them to see this differently, whether they live in blue states or red states, so we can start laying the groundwork to start having, again, more discussions that deal around like curiosity and how we can have the best outcomes, versus the versus type mode that we're in right now. And I think that we should be educating our kids at a much younger age about these sorts of things, because I think there's a lot of curiosity out there about that. Like my son's is in college, but he's very curious about this topic and this particular issue, and he asks me about it all the time. And so I think that's a great opportunity. The lady in the back asked something about education that I've been thinking a lot about as I've watched what's happening at our university systems. And our universities absolutely do need to be a place where there can be a lot of different views and opinions about things, whether they make people uncomfortable, whether they don't like them, whatever it may happen to be. But we don't need to destroy our university system. And a lot of the rhetoric around the university system, I do think that is dangerous, because I think that it's going to lead to us going back to a time to where certain things were suppressed because maybe it made people feel uncomfortable. And I think about a conversation that Bobby Kennedy, when he was Attorney General, and President Kennedy, when he was in the White House, for the first time, a lot of the civil rights things were being broadcast on television. And so they're sitting in the Oval Office or in one of the rooms of the White House, and they're watching Ole Miss, University of Ole Miss, almost burn to the ground, literally, because they were going to segregate the university with a black man named James Meredith. And a fool from here, sadly, named General Edwin Walker, got on a plane and flew up to Oxford and became almost the leader of this mob. And you had a minister that was beat up. You had a couple of people that were killed, while the state government there literally watched the university literally almost burn to the ground. And President Kennedy said something to his brother while he was watching that. He said, everything that we learned at Harvard was a complete lie. Everything that we learned at Harvard was a complete lie. They had at that up until that time period, Northeastern liberal Harvard had taught the lost cause version of the Civil War, and so they thought that these marchers and all these things that were happening before they saw Ole Miss burn to the ground with their own eyes, they thought it was a lie. They thought that it was just people just causing trouble, and it was going to make it hard for him to get reelected because he was going to have to tackle this racial issue. But as we moved on throughout time, and we did start integrating our universities, the black community's response to the university system was not to shut it down because it was racist and that it taught things like the lost cause that shouldn't have ever been taught there. We wanted to be a part of it to try to make it better. And that's what we should be doing. We shouldn't be tearing down our university system because of something that we heard on talk radio. We should be trying to make it better the same way how we did back in the 1960s and 70s as we were moving out of segregation. We weren't trying to destroy it, we were trying to integrate it and assimilate. That's what we should be doing. He asked the question about, in closing, I'm always curious about new things. I just learned about how we can get energy from space the other day. I knew nothing about it. And so, again, utilizing the caucus ethically, like Chuck talked about, and being able to present those things to us, I think is a great way for us to learn about new things that are happening.
Thank you, Congressman Veasey. Thank you, Congressman Fleischmann. We appreciate the work that you're doing to bring folks together. We want to know how we can help. And we're going to hear a little more from you, Congressman Fleischmann, at lunchtime today.
Well, thank you.
So,
I look forward to that.
Let's thank them. We're going to bring up the next panel as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to see you, man.